Greetings, gentle viewers. I'm George from Ireland. I'm outside K Chesterton's house in London. So K Chesterton is renowned as one of the most prolific writers of the early 20th century of essays and novels and so forth. So I'm in Kensington, London. Now, he was born in Kensington, not in this house in Camden Hill, which is not very far away. I know it's not the area of North London, Camden. It's spelled Campden Hill, but the P is silent. Anyway, so he came from an upper middle class family, and they were Unitarians, which is to say they rejected the Westminster Confession of Faith. They didn't believe in the Trinity. They believed in the unity of God. They were conventional Protestants apart from that. Perhaps surprisingly, he was baptized into the Church of England. So he then attended St Paul's School, which in those days was only about a mile that away. Obviously in the 1960s moved south of the Thames to an area called Barnes. Anyway, so that was one of the most distinguished schools in the realm he was attending. And he finished up there. He went to the Slade School of Art. He wasn't much good at sport, having all the grace of a Meccano giraffe when he moved. He was a mountain of a man. He grew to 6'4", which was far above average for the time. It's tall even now, and he had a gargantuan girth. He's the kind of guy who would make me look anorexic by comparison. So probably any sport he'd be any good at would be sumo wrestling. So he was no good at games at school, but he was a voracious reader, and as I say, he produced simply huge amounts of text, an absolutely indefatigable writer, a highly eccentric sort. In his dress was relative sartorial indifference, a half-smoked cigar chomping in the corner of his mouth half the time. His hair seldom saw a comb, and he often liked to affect a cape and a sword stick. So how much of this was an affectation, or was he just generally that odd? I'm not quite sure. He later married Frances. I don't think they had any children, though. So he made his living as a journalist, a novelist, an essayist. And when he was not particularly political, despite this being a time when there were many political debates that were furiously debated. Was he a liberal? Was he conservative? Then Labour came along. Did he think the First World War was right or wrong? He didn't clearly take sides on most of these issues. So he was a well-known figure here in literary London. He was a friend and an rival of George Bernard Shaw, who had a rather different take on things. George Bernard Shaw, who was a devout atheist. Now, he'd been brought up an Anglican. As I say, he became an Anglo-Catholic, said let's rediscover the Catholic traditions within the Church of England, let's have sacraments, and let's have our clergy called dressed as Father. We should have monks and nuns back, things like that. We should venerate the saints, especially the Blessed Virgin. He eventually took the logical step and actually crossed the Tiber, because he thought that Anglicanism, even Anglo-Catholicism, was simply a cheap imitation. You might as well have the real thing. There was the call to unity. That was the one true church. That appealed to his taste for the ceremonial and the emotive. Whereas he felt Anglicanism was too banal, too quotidian. He wanted something special, something otherworldly. And Catholicism, with its bells and smells and everything in Latin in those days, appealed to his romantic sensibility. As I say, he actually trained as an artist in a sense more than a writer, and that comes across in his writing, in his very vivid descriptions of the scene in visual terms, not just in terms of what people were saying or their personality or timbre, but all that's there too. He created a character called Father Brown, a Catholic priest who was a sleuth hound, a sort of a Catholic answer to Sherlock Holmes, if you will. So was he anti-Semitic? Some people thought so, like when the Marconi scandal broke out, because remember Guglielmo Marconi from Bologna was the guy who invented the radio, who was half Irish. Hurrah, another genius for Hibernia. But the Ruskies will tell you that Popov invented the radio. I don't know if there's any in it. Now, okay, I know Marconi was Irish, but I'm willing to accept that Popov invented the radio if you could prove that to me. I'm not closed-minded about that. But anyway, radios had obviously great significance for the military first of all, and there was a Marconi scandal. Or was there peculation? Was the Liberal government of the day accepting douceur to buy things from Marconi rather than the other radio manufacturers? And what's his face? G.K. Chesterton saw the hand of the Jew, as they would have put it, in it, and tried to blame Jewish people for this. I'm not sure if any Jewish people were concerned at the scandal or not, but not blame the Italians or the English or whoever else was involved. Only one ethno-religious group was getting it in the neck from him. But later on, he came to say that Jewish people ought to have their own territory, and they were a minority everywhere, and this was wrong. They were a distinct nation by any definition, and giving them Palestine was the right thing to do. And indeed, it was a day one abominator of Nazism, but he was almost dying by that point. There's a famous contretemps he had with G.B. Shaw, when George Bernard Shaw, he sees Shaw, who was notoriously cadaverous, and say, Shaw, if anyone saw you, they'd say a famine hit England, and Shaw hit back, saying they'd say that you caused it, because he was just so morbidly corpulent. G.K. Chesterton. Incidentally, A K Chesterton, that doyen of white supremacism, was his first cousin once removed. I got that right. Was more prominent in the 1950s. But back to G.K. Chesterton. So he wrote some doggerel. One of his humorous verses is, now the Irish Gael is the man whom the gods drove mad, for all his wars are merry, and all his songs are sad. Which I don't think is true about us, but there we go. And of course, being a Catholic, he would have come into contact with lots of Irish people, because there were not many people who were plain English who converted to Catholicism. Yes, a few did, it was fashionable, but it was still very much a minority thing here at the time. People, normally he'd moved from Ireland or Italy or somewhere like that, were Catholics in London back then. So he died in 1936. He's not a writer who's widely appreciated these days. He was very droll. He liked contrapuntalism, taking well-known aphorisms or adages and inverting them in order to illustrate his point. So that is G.K. Chesterton, someone who ought to come back into fashion, and this is where he lived. And if I'm correct, this is also where he died. That prodigious author. Right, so signing off now. Please follow me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and thank you so much for your donations on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com, and book lessons with me in history, in English as a foreign language, English literature, politics, religious studies, geography, French, law. Choose me to help you with your redactions, your essays, your dissertations, and so forth, and I shall edit them. Oh, I also translate from French, Spanish, Italian, Romanian, Russian, and German. Okay, toodaloo.